Welcome. It has just gone 7 p.m, Wednesday, the 31st of August, and you are watching episode 60 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap, providing an insight to the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, our forests. Real or ornamental is my guest, Rhys Bosley. Rhys is a passionate recreational hunter who runs the State Forest Hunting for Queensland and the Queensland State Forest User Alliance campaigns. Through these campaigns, Rhys fights to obtain legal public land access for Queenslanders, hunters, and other outdoor recreational users, and to fight the lockup of Queensland's public lands in national parks in cooperation with other forest users such as the timber and grazing industries. Rhys has a background in public policy and economics. He applies in his fight for public land and access, and is also an active member of the Catters Australia Party. Welcome, Rhys.
Hi, Bill. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good.
Now, in the interest of full disclosure, we will point out that you actually reside in the Brisbane area. So, yep. But you're all in for the defence of regional Queensland and getting more use out of our land area.
Yep, I think that I'm in suburban Brisbane, so I think that we've actually got more in common with regional Queensland than we do with the inner city.
Now, can you tell us how you came to get involved with the recreational pastimes that you're currently in, and the incentive to sort of start up the two Facebook campaigns to get more public access to public lands, especially state forest and national parks?
Yeah, that's I will do that, Bill. I was, I guess, looking for something new, recreationally to take on. I'd come back from Canberra and I was working in Brisbane, and I decided to get a four-wheel drive to explore regional Queensland. I did that, and I also had some friends who hunted, so I thought that would be a good thing to get into. And I got my firearms license, and I thought that I would be able to hunt on public land, because I'd heard you could do that in New South Wales from friends who hunted down there. But I found out when I started that you're not able to do that. And it was just before the Newman government came into power, and I contacted the local candidate for the LNP at the time, and he suggested that I join that party, which I was a member of, and see whether or not we could do anything about it. So I joined the LNP, and I did the usual stuff that volunteers do in terms of helping them get elected. And I put up a motion once they were elected, I put up a motion through our branch to the 2013 state conference of the LNP, which was overwhelmingly supported by members, but that was knocked back by that was for legalised state forest hunting in Queensland. And there was also a motion by one of the branches in far north Queensland to allow pig hunting in national parks, but that was knocked back by the cabinet in the LNP at the time. I managed to negotiate a more limited club-based arrangement that we were going to get started, where hunting clubs were allowed to go on and engage in pest management on public land. But then, of course, they lost the 2015 election, and the Labor Party put an end to that idea. And subsequently, I've, through various different means, attempted to gain lobby for public land access through various means. The most recent was a very good friend of mine, Daniel Boniface, started a petition for public land hunting, which was very successful. It was widely supported over 13,000 people in 2019, but that was knocked back by the Labor government again. I actually expected that because that's not their thing. But it's been the platform to continue to lobby for state forest hunting. I also realised that there are a lot of other state forest users, recreational users, who are in the same boat as hunters are, or they may have some access, but it's very limited compared to places like New South Wales. So I started another petition aimed at stopping our forests being locked up in national parks, which would further limit our access. That was widely supported and got over 6,000 signatures. And that was knocked back as well. We were basically told that everything was okay and they were going to continue to lock up our state forests. So I supported candidates and the Katter Party and Stephen Andrew from Marani in the 2020 election in terms of letting people know that they supported public land access. But after the 2020 election, I've decided that the best way to go about it, given that they're the only party who seems to care about this issue, is to actually join the Katter Party and to try to help them by promoting their policies towards public land access through the pages and through other means.
I think one of the other surprising things is some people have been going to a national park or an area on a regular basis, and then one day they turn up and all of a sudden there's no access. The gates are shut. There's chains across the thing. Do you sort of get any notice that these things are going to occur, or they just happen, or?
Well, I only hear about it because being a hunter, I don't even get to hunt in Queensland, so I don't go to any of our state forests or national parks. Apart from when I'm doing campaigning, I've visited places and taken pictures of them and said this is what you're missing out on, but I don't actually get to go there. I drive into regional New South Wales and spend my money in the New South Wales regional economy, which I think is a real shame for regional Queensland that it's missing out on regional tourism like that. But yeah, I do understand that there's massive management issues on Queensland public land. It's actually very backwards. Our state forests, for example, are managed by, I think it's 3 different departments, depending on what aspect of the forest. Compared to New South Wales, where they've got one organisation, the Forestry Corporation, who manage the entire thing. So it's much more, much less fragmented. You've got multiple different types of leases on Queensland forests. You've got, then of course you've got national parks as well. And like you say, we recently had a case where Michael Pugh, who is a very passionate outdoor advocate up in Townsville in the Burdekin area. He takes people on bushwalks. He tried to take a group of people on a bushwalk into one of their national parks, and there was just a chain across the front of it. And that was a real he actually runs it as a volunteer, but it's a real drag on regional tourism if that sort of thing can happen without warning, and people who are relying on access to those places aren't warned about that. The fossicers or recreational prospectors, as the gold people who go after gold like to call themselves, they face all sorts of problems where they'll come up and there'll be a gate will be locked that wasn't supposed to be, and nobody's had any warning about it. There's businesses that rely on that, people who sell their the mine lab detectors and the like. So yeah, our public land management in Queensland is a mess. There's no gilding the lily. It's a mess. It really is.
Yeah, the other thing is too, my expectations of all land in Australia, it should provide a dividend of some sort to the whole population, right? I mean, of course, we know we've got our residential land, and that provides housing for people and places to live. We've got public open parks in the suburbs. People in news go there for a picnic and that. Then we've got our national parks and state forests and that. they still should be giving a good dividend. Now, by a dividend, I don't necessarily mean it has to be money, but it should be, you know, a combination of things like support industry, like timber where it's viable, recreation. So you're using the amenity for it, and that also allows those incomes to be sort of, well, if we're getting incomes from out of the forest and the national parks for these sort of, we can reinvest it. It's unfortunate you go to New South Wales all the time, but do you get an indication from users on your Facebook page about the general conditions in regards to amenity in the state forest, and that where you are allowed to go, like toilet facilities, you know, bits and pieces, rubbish collection and things like that? Is that there, or is that falling away?
Well, I just, you know, for a start, I say you're right. I agree. There should be a dividend. Now, the environmentalists would tell us that the national parks protect environmental values. A well-managed national park that's managing something that's that needs to be locked away, like something special, then, or, you know, very, very closely managed, I can accept that. But a lot of our national parks are old forestry. They're not even virgin forest, that are just being locked up to meet a percentage target. Our state government has committed to locking up 17% of Queensland. They didn't need to. More than 17% of Australia is already locked up under a United Nations treaty. Queensland's got less area that's suitable to be locked up, and so they're insisting. It was basically a promise to the Green voters in the 2015 election, and they're persisting with that in a bloody-minded way. And I'll add that the LNP aren't calling that out. All that they're doing is calling out that they haven't met the 17.5% quota yet, or the 17% quota yet. They're at 8%. Now they're buying old cattle stations and turning them into national parks. So you're locking up land that isn't really, doesn't really have the environmental values that they talk about. You're losing the productive capacity of that land. So they're due to lock up 20,000 hectares of national park of state forest in the Wide Bay region in 2026. And that we've already got constrained timber supply, but so you're taking that away. You're taking away the fact that the timber industry manage the forest well, and you've got an income source. So your environmental management is better because you've got the money to do it if you're making money from that. It's just I really feel very strongly that this policy is actually economic, social, and environmental vandalism. It makes literally no sense to keep locking up land that they can't look after properly, and then manage none of it properly. The land ends up full of feral pests, it ends up full of weeds, and it catches on fire. And you tell me the environmental value in that. So it's a really stupid policy, and I wish that the Labor Party would just admit that we got that wrong, and I wish that the LNP would actually do what an opposition is supposed to do, and oppose things in a sensible way, rather than just taking the low road and trying to pitch for the environmental vote themselves. Because let's face it, the environmental vote is never going to vote for LNP anyway. But that's the system that we've got with the two parties, and that's why I support the Katter Party now, because they're the only ones who have a substantial presence, who are interested in doing the right thing.
I think the other thing is, like you did point out, is that there's a lot of land that's now being acquired that is of doubtful value as even as a state forest, mainly because it's been stripped of most of its timber anyway, and it might be a bit of woodlands, or it certainly doesn't warrant being a national park because A, it isn't pristine enough, and B, the ecological value has probably been stripped out at its time. But you would have to be buoyed with the access to public land now by the renewables industry. Like we've got Chilumban wood forests up here in Cairns. That was all preserved for against the logging and all that sort of thing. But it's fine now. They can go through 70-metre wide access roads to it to put in 95 wind turbines, and that's going to be scheduled for a lot of public land right down the east coast. So
yeah, it's funny, isn't it? I think you're being I think you're being ironic here. Yeah, it's and you got windmills that parrots can fly into and all sorts of stuff like that. It's awesome. It's there's a lot of money behind all of this, Bill. We've got American, if you've heard of the Pew Charitable Trusts, they're an American charitable trust that funds the Queensland environment groups, the various Queensland environment groups, and campaigns for the continued lockup of land. They are also proponents of carbon farming. And I don't know whether you know, with national parks, if land is locked up in a national park, it's not able to be carbon farmed. So I don't know the details, so I can't say for certain, but I think questions do need to be asked whether there's an attempt to influence supply and demand in the carbon permit market by locking up land, which ultimately then becomes is not able to be, carbon permits aren't able to be taken
not
from
in
it.
the mix.
Yeah, and the prices go up on other land. But I would actually like to see that investigated in Parliament, whether or not it's appropriate that we have foreign bodies like an American, the Pew Charitable Trust. They're an American crowd who they were founded by the oil industry. They say that there's a lot of energy executives on it still, but it's all a bit opaque. And I don't like the idea of foreign organisations interfering in our political process in a way that I don't think necessarily takes into account the well-being of Queenslanders.
I think there's a couple of other issues in regards to more acquisition of land to make more state forests or national parks. There's also another factor. There's NGOs out there now buying up, like you say, oil cattle stations and things like that, and just locking and leaving. I mean, it might be sort of like they're getting kudos for acquiring this land, but they've never been able to manage the land that they've had. I mean, my understanding, if you're a farmer or a producer living next door to a national park or a state forest, you can expect every weed, noxious weed, and every feral animal to come out of that area into your area, and you've got no ability to sort of control them. And the state government doesn't seem to be very proactive in regards to managing those feral animals and those noxious weeds.
Well, it's just that they've essentially, like you said, land should come at a dividend. They've essentially turned it from something that's an asset that makes money and that you can then spend on managing weeds and feral animals into something that's a liability, and all of that management now takes taxpayers' money. Now they do, there is regional tourism in our national parks, but I would argue that a lot of it would happen anyway if they were state forests. So we're essentially ending up with those areas making a lot less money for the state, for the state economy than they would otherwise. Whereas if you go into New South Wales, the Forestry Corporation, all of those issues, for example, in Queensland, you asked before about campgrounds and the like and amenities. Camping in the New South Wales State Forest is free. It all comes from the sustainable harvest of timber and money. There's a community service obligation, so they maintain the infrastructure. People don't pay to camp. They are allowed to access the forests widely, including the fire trails. Are allowed to hunt. The areas for fossicking and recreational prospecting are massive compared to our little tiny areas. Yeah, so those forests are there's money, they're generating money, which then ultimately some of that ends up coming back and being used to manage the forest itself. So you're talking about economic sustainability as well as environmental sustainability. In Queensland, every time we lock up a bit of land, it becomes another liability. And the Queensland government's done its own cost benefit analysis on our national parks, and it found that there's spending on visitor infrastructure for national parks, like your campgrounds and park tracks and all of that sort of stuff, actually generates in the national parks, which are sort of special, like in Carnarvon or Noosa National Park or the like. They are, or the Daintree up your way. That generates over $6 for every dollar spent. Now that's where your public money should be going, is into those special places that generate real economic returns, as opposed to into private, as opposed to into old forestry, essentially. Which is, or old cattle stations, which is what happens whenever we lock up another piece of land just to meet this stupid target. The government just need to say we got it wrong, and the LNP need to agree with them, and they need to make an effort to educate the Greens voters why they got it wrong. Now, there are an element of Greens voters who are completely unreasonable, but a lot of people who are environmentally aware people, you call them soft Green voters, and they just don't know about these issues. But if you explain it to them, they're intelligent enough to get it. I've completely changed the view in a discussion with a young lady who I was talking to about. She had an environmentalist background, and I explained to her about the need for the forest to be economically sustainable so that we can pay to manage them, and it completely changed her view in the course of a conversation. But the major parties are just so short-sighted that they won't have those conversations and draw people away from the lunatic fringe with the Greens.
But who wants to admit that they've been wrong?
Yeah,
that's one of the biggest problems. I think there's so much invested in the decision that regardless if you come up with a logical, sound, cost-benefited analysis of that, and I mean that's obvious. I mean, we've had inquiries at different times and so-called public consultation with things like the Land Management Act and that, which had about 700 and something submissions. But not one word of that act changed as a result, which is very worrying, and especially when there was so much good information by people who had 40, 50 years experience in the ecology field. You know, people like, I think his name was Bill Woodlands or something like that. But he put in a magnificent paper with all the history on with photographs going back to the turn of the last century, sort of thing, that showed what things were like and what they were now, and they still don't change. They still don't accept that sort of expertise. They only seem to rely on the expertise that's in academia and in the bureaucracy in Brisbane.
Yeah, and this is the thing, is that it is, from what I can see, you know, there are a set of people who are very personally invested in terms of their reputations and the right in academia, probably more than anything else, who just might not ever be prepared to admit that we've got it wrong. But we need to be finding. I don't accept that. You know, all of these I mean, the people that I deal with who are Greens voters are, usually nice people. They're not horrible people. They just believe that what they believe for the best of the world, but they're just not exposed to an alternative view, and that needs to start changing. And the major parties are, by taking the low road, are and especially the LNP, because they're supposed to be a party that also represents regional Queensland, are really letting down the people of Queensland by not being prepared to take that on. So, we need to find our own ways to get that discussion out there, and let people know that no, the land is. I put it as we should be conservationists. We should care about the environment. But we shouldn't be preservationists where we try to lock the environment away and have some utopian ideal that it's all going to go back to the way things were, because that's never going to happen. People need to be part of the environment, and yeah, I just think that.
I think the thing is also is a lot of people portray the natural environment as something that's really, really fragile, that it can't adapt or recover, which is ridiculous, because we've seen where people have come along and look at locking up the land, and they says, oh, we've got to lock this up because it's so magnificent. But the place has been logged, over 3 generations. It's been cut down and regrown 3 or 4 times. Yet they say, well, we've got to keep this magnificent forest. You can keep the magnificent forest even if you keep cutting, a percentage of the trees down. But they sort of don't get it.
Yeah, and they won't accept that because you've got all these people, I think, and this is me speculating, but people have become very invested in the anti-forestry fight. It was actually National Timber Day. I think it was yesterday or the day before, incidentally. But they've become very invested in it from the days when you did have your clear fell forestry, where they just wiped out entire areas of native forestry without regard to, things, and they won't accept that this can be done. This can be done well, but we've got to get to the people in the middle, and we've got to explain to them why it can be done well, and why. I mean, like this. The stupid thing is that we import. I think it's. I read something the other day. It was the producer price index for the construction sector, for I think it was residential construction, and we import things like basically the rough cut blocks from Canada, like timber from Canada, or I know that we import timber from Europe, laminated timber, for example. So we're not stopping trees being cut down by locking up our own forest. They just get cut down somewhere else in the world, and they get shipped to Australia, which is obviously a massive amount of carbon miles, because a ship uses diesel and pumps out emissions, and then we use somebody else's timber as opposed to sustainably logging our own and making the products here. And I just think it's if people get to know the way the industry is currently run with these environmental laws and how stupid it is, I think that I just don't accept that Queensland is that stupid that they can't get that.
But I also think it's a problem with the industry, like the timber industry. They don't defend themselves very well in regards to putting out their case of all the benefits in that, and do some comparisons. Because last year I had Mark Zayek on from New South Wales. He was Choosers and Fishers, but he's also the chairman and looking after the sustainable timber industry inquiry. And it's sort of amazing in regards to when you compare Australia's timber industry with a place like Finland. I mean, Finland has only got, I think, something like a fifth of our forest area. It's a very slow growing climate, but they managed to take 11 times the value from their forests than what we do. That just shows how poorly all the restrictions that are out there, just stopping us from harvesting a decent quantity of timber, and making our contribution to the world's requirements for timber.
Yeah, I think that I mean, there are people in the timber industry who do undertake education. I remember reading one reference, and it just escapes me exactly who did it right now, with the timber industry, where they took school kids into the 16 and 17-year-olds into the forests and taught them about sustainable forestry. And at the end of the session, the leader of the kids said, I don't understand why our teachers are telling us that forestry is bad. It's a never-ending renewable resource, sustainable renewable resource. So there are people doing it, but unfortunately, we've got politicians in Queensland, and it's not everywhere. There's politicians out elsewhere who are fighting for the timber industry. I'll actually bring up the name of one of them. One of them now. I just can't remember his. It just escapes me. As a Tasmanian, he's a Liberal Party politician in Tasmania. But
well, actually, I did see a video of. I did see a video of a Tasmanian MP stand up there and really serve it out to the Greens in regards to, we should be doing more with our industry. And his name was Felix Ellis.
That's the one.
And
yeah,
it's a really, really good speech. Actually, I've already sent him an invitation to come on to this show and put his message across as well. But that was a fantastic speech. And like I say, and the other thing is we probably shouldn't be taking the students into the forest to teach them. We should be taking the teachers in there to get them into the, this is the real world. Stop teaching garbage.
Yeah, well, I think we should take them all. If you teach a 14-year-old, now we've got 4-year cycles at the beginning of a term, then they're a voter in the 4 years time, and that is something that I think that the left-wing side of politics has done a lot better than the conservative side of politics. Is they get this rolling sort of these cohorts of younger voters coming in because they actually cater to younger people, whereas the conservative side cater to older people, and rolling cohorts of older people die. Basically, like it's that's that's the reality. So we're pitching in some ways. We've got to learn to pitch to the younger people, or we're going to lose this battle. And I don't think that we've got to just give them credit for their intelligence, and they will they will understand what's good for their future, because what they're being taught at the moment isn't good for their future.
Actually, now I'd just like to move over to New South Wales, because I think there's a lot more valuable conversation in what goes on in New South Wales. Both A, for the acquisition of land, and B, for the access to state forest. Oops. This is highlighting some of the purchases in New South Wales. I think this purchase of
Sorry, you're just breaking up there, Bill.
Was in, it was in 2020.
I just lost you there, Bill. Sorry.
Rhys, I'm just trying to get him on.
No worries.
And get him back. Won't be a second. Sorry, Rhys. There he is.
What? You there, Andrew? You might have
Yep.
to.
All good, Bill.
You
Just
might
try
have
your
to
share
put-
again.
Yeah. Okay. I'll go back to the share.
Yep, we can hear you loud and clear. You got a good connection.
So this was the biggest purchase back in 2020, and they're continuing to purchase at a reasonable rate, and they've acquired additional 10 properties for a total of nearly 6,000 hectares in less than 12 months, and that's going to continue. And we know now with the new federal government, there's even more emphasis by them to even acquire more land. So I haven't seen a lot of figures or interest in regards to what's happening in Queensland, but you can go to the New South Wales government website and you can get all this information fairly updated fairly regular.
Yeah. Well, in Queensland, we're just at around 8.5% of the state that's been locked up. They are still arguing over the 20,000 hectares in the Wide Bay region that they want to lock up, which won't make much of a difference. They're buying up old cattle stations, but you know, like they need to give it up. There's not, you know, surely they realise that we can't lock up all of our timber resource. I mean, up in Noosa, they're even locking up land that has been under the last, the last area of pine forest, which has been logged, and then they call it rewilding, and they want to turn that into national park. So they're even taking away areas of non-native forests, that plantations, which I mean, it's ridiculous. It's just, you know, what are people supposed to build their houses with? You know, yeah.
I think the other thing, like I say, the other concern is that they take on this land, but I'm also concerned that they haven't got the ability or the willingness or the funds to manage it properly. So that's a problem. And now if we look at New South Wales in particular, especially in the types of the Great Alps area and that, you know, we had the big fires in the summer of 2019-20. Now, it's getting to the situation where they've sort of removed a lot of people from the logging sort of industry out of those forests. The tracks have been degraded. There's not the manpower in there anymore because the loggers are gone, so they haven't got the firefighting resources on hand. If we continue down this way, how dangerous will it be to go into those real dense forests in summertime in the future, and not, you know, and being at risk from, you know, getting roasted like all the fauna, natural fauna that's there?
Well, I'm not a professional forester, so I can't give you a definitive answer on you know, how much more risky it's going to be. But I mean, I guess that if the forests do need to be managed, and if they're not generating money with which we can manage them, then it can only get worse. But the issue is after the last bushfires, there was a lot of you know, the academics on the side of the anti-forestry crowd were madly running around coming up with justifications for why it was forestry's fault. You know, that there was bits and pieces of timber that they'd left around and the like, and all sorts of arguments like that. So you've got people who are just not, they're invested in things that are not the truth, and it's really sad. Like I've spent a lot of time in universities, and I'm so disappointed with the way our university system has gone with these people who have it's just very unethical. The way that people are they're so attached to their pet theory that when they're meant to be places of learning and inquiry, that they will they just don't they don't care about brainwashing kids with things that are bad for them ultimately in the future, with you know, setting up the economy to fail, the environment to fail, and taking away those social resources that the forests are, particularly for the regional areas. On that, can I bring up the map that I showed you before
Yes.
about what we're missing out on in Queensland? I just this is where's my share? Oh, here we go. Share screen. Okay, so this is just for the viewers. This is Barracool State Forest. You can see it there, which is about 4 hours northwest of Brisbane, mainly west, and just about 45 kilometres north of Chinchilla. And this is the largest forest in the Southern Hemisphere. It's 283,000 hectares, and it's part of a much bigger forestry system in this area. I actually wrote an article on my hunting page where it talked about Barracool and the way it would basically service the needs. Barracool alone would basically service the needs of hunters within 6 hours. And as I'll show you soon, there's plenty of us who travel further than that. Everywhere from Rockhampton down to the Gold Coast. And that's one forest that people, I talk about Barracool State Forest to people and they don't even realize that we've got the biggest state forest in the Southern Hemisphere in southern Queensland, in southern Queensland. Yeah. Now this is, and I was showing you guys before, this is where I travel to go hunting. I travel down to Nundle, which is down near Tamworth, which is just sort of roughly in this sort of area here. And there's a big forestry system down there. I'll show you the difference on the map between that, where the arrow's pointing, and where I travel from Brisbane. I go down there because there's good deer hunting and the like. There isn't in Barracool, admittedly, but we've got plenty of deer in the forests closer to the coast, as well as elsewhere. And there's also a big area of hunting down here, but that's the distances that we're prepared to travel from Brisbane. And it's not, I don't just want to make this a Brisbane thing. There's people throughout regional Queensland who are missing out on being able to hunt on public land, these massive resources like Barracool and all the way up the coast. It's more national parks up in North Queensland, but there's, the Katter Party have pushed for people to be able to hunt pigs and get them out of the national parks as well. That's what we're missing out on, is there's these massive forestry resources, there's big resources of hunters who would be prepared to go in and bring out, reduce the impact of introduced animals. And as well as that, these are big areas that other recreational users could potentially use if they were allowed to. But, to my knowledge, nobody's allowed to go fossicking or recreational prospecting in Barracool. It's the crazy thing is our state forests are almost managed like they're national parks, because a lot of them are actually managed by the National Parks and Wildlife Service. So I just think it's such a shame that we've got this pig-headedness and narrow-mindedness that's stopping regional Queensland from benefiting from these massive resources. But that's the way it is. One of the other issues I wanted to talk about was we've got on our state forests, there's about 200 grazing leases actually on the state forests, and they're leases to graze cattle, but they're not for exclusive use. No lease on the in the Forestry Act can exclude another type of activity.
You want to close that down now?
Oh, yep, certainly, yep. Another type of activity that's permitted in the Forestry Act. The Forestry Act permits recreation timber, environmental purposes, and also grazing on the state forests. But we've got the grazing leases, and there's a bit of history to it. They're different to elsewhere because the leaseholders are responsible for maintaining infrastructure on the forest, and that was set up in 1959 because it was easier for them to manage their own infrastructure than to rely on the forestry department to do it. So they've basically started treating the leases like they're a freehold property and discouraging people from coming onto them. And there's also a fair bit of activity in the through the political channels as well to keep those leases as exclusive as possible. The issue is those leases, 70 more of those leases are going to go to National Park. They're basically, as they're expiring, they're locking those leases up in National Park. 70 more of them are going to go. They're going to lose access to those forests in May next year. And I really wish that we could get it across to the grazing leaseholders that the more people are invested in using the forests, the more political clout we've got to do something about it. If you've only got 200 families invested in keeping those forests as forests, they're going to go to National Park. If you've got big swaths of the Queensland population who want those forests to remain open because they can use them for recreational use like they can in New South Wales, then the leaseholders are far more likely to be able to keep their leases. And even like we could roll back national park lockups that should never have been made, and people could get leases back. But that's got to, we've got to, and I'm not saying that, we would need systems in place that allow them to be able to manage their businesses. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be that, but there needs to be a commitment from that group of people to come to the table and accommodate the rest of Queensland. If nothing else, if they just want to save their own leases, because they've been losing them for since Peter Beattie was Premier now, and it's not going in any other direction as far as I can see.
I think that's one thing. People are very slow to catch on in regards to just not just making it about them and their use. They've got to understand that, well, the actions of the specific interest people to close it down, they're going to win if you aren't going to engage with all the other parties that can make use of this land. And especially now, if you look at Queensland, you've got an environmental department that's run, or the minister is a first term MP. Like, give us a break. Like, she hasn't done any other real job in a lot. And the thing is, the chief of staff is Nick Heath, who comes from the wildlife, like the World Wildlife Foundation and things like that, who's had a vested interest in basically dehumanizing the environment over years and years. So you're not going to get any satisfaction or sense out of them unless you've got political muscle.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And you're exactly right. And it needs to, like, we need groups in the regions to let both Labor and the LNP, because there's Labor and LNP seats in the regions, know that they can lose their seats to the Katter Party, and if necessary, take their seats off them and hopefully win the balance of power. But we also need to be convincing city MPs, and ideally, if we can get independents and the like to run, to challenge people for their seats in the cities, that these issues matter in the cities as well. I just, and this is why I started off by saying we've got similar problems in the suburbs to what you have in the regions, and it usually, I get a bit of a raised eyebrows when I say that to people from the regions, but hear me out. If you walk up my street out the door here and look at the number of four-wheel drives in the driveways, and all of those people who are probably at the moment limited to going and driving up and down Bribie Island Beach, and if they get adventurous, they might go up to Fraser Island by and large. But other than that, it's driving through a few. You're only allowed to drive on the gazetted roads in the forests, and they're very limited in the activities that they can undertake when they actually go out and use their four-wheel drives. Limited with the trail bike riding, fossicking, hunting they can't do at all. Even mountain bike riding they're coming down on now in some places. The greenies don't like that either. You get it in an organised way, get it across to people in the suburbs that they're being ripped off for their recreational opportunities out in the regions. and get them chewing the ear of those Labor and LNP MPs who are currently only listening to the environment vote because they're organised, then that becomes powerful. Those MPs in the cities are to a certain extent, they're limited to a certain extent by the fact that they've got to keep their jobs. There was Mark Robinson out at Ugaroo, which is in the Redlands. He had a big environmental issue with some developers wanted to build properties on a wetland, and they had a very prominent independent MP come in, not MP, candidate come in before the Teals became a thing down south, and she almost took his seat off him. So if there's not a countervailing message to MPs like that there's other people in their electorates who, value the environment, but also value those outdoor recreational opportunities and also care about things like the timber industry and grazing and rural industry, because we're Queenslanders and we're all supposed to care about one another, then if there's not that countervailing message, then what's that guy going to do? Is he going to vote for legislation that protects his job or not? What are most people going to do? So we've just got so far to go, and we need to start now at getting that message out, not only in the regions that there are real alternatives like the Katter Party, but also we need to get out and get the message out in the city as well.
I think it's interesting in regards to the Katter Party. I mean, they did take the space of the old LNP or Nationals when they merged in about 2008. Central North Queensland is particularly noticeable. I think there's a total of 17 seats in Central North Queensland as far as the state electorates go, because I don't count Collide because it goes too far south. It goes almost to 160 kilometres northwest of Brisbane. So I'll give that to the southwest or the southern division, whatever you want to. But we have a situation of those 17 seats, 11 of them are perpetually Labor. So we have got a problem there in the messaging and that. And I mean, I've sat down and I've spoken for hours to Bob, drinking a milkshake by all things. But it's, to me, with the Katters, it's penetration, and I don't know if they've got penetration to move into sort of places like Cairns and Townsville, where there's 6 seats available on offer to take off the Labor Party. But one thing I am interested. One thing I'm interested is the progress of the shooters and fishers and farmers in New South Wales in the 2019 election.
Yeah. I believe that the shooters, you'd need to talk to the Katter Party about. I'm not in a position where I can talk about their prospects in different seats, other than that I know that. I think that when you talk about those seats being perpetually Labor, I think about my grandfather who was a Labor Party stalwart in New Zealand. He was a life member of the Labor Party and a branch president. And because my father's side of the family were Nationals, which is like the LNP in New Zealand, and we used to have arguments about politics, and he used to call me a little Tory bastard. That was his loving way of referring to me. But when he wasn't telling me, I was wet behind the ears. But I honestly think that he would support the Katter Party rather than the modern Labor Party. He actually handed in his life membership to the New Zealand Labor Party back in the early 90s, because he just said they're not, they're essentially not the type of Labor Party that they were anymore. And that's the thing I like about the Katter Party. I don't see why you need to have workers and businesses having their own party. We're all Queenslanders and we're all Australians, and they're a party where there's people who previously would have come from Labor and would have come from the LNP in there. And I think that's the message that I get out to any North Queensland voters, is that they care about workers. The Katter Party. I think that Bob Katter's father was a Labor person before he went over to the Country Party. But the shooters, fishers, and farmers in New South Wales, they've got a bit of a head start because they've got an upper house, so they obviously were able to get members in just based on the shooting vote to begin with. I think that they've only got 3 lower house MPs, so the Katter Party is.
Yeah, well, only just got into that space in the last few years, because the space they've taken is not from Labor. That is taken off the National Party. The National Party in New South Wales obviously has got too much in lockstep with the Liberal Party, and I think the big breaks came in the amalgamation of councils that the Nationals backed the Liberal Party in back in the days. I think it might even be back in Farrell and Baird's day. That was the first big problem, and the other one is the lockstep they were in come to the greyhounds. Now, I'm don't know anything about greyhounds, but I know people who are involved in it love their dogs and they love greyhound racing. And regional New South Wales was a big part of life for a lot of people. So once that was threatened, that gave the opportunity for the shooters, fishers and farmers to get in there. They won Orange in a by-election in 2016. Come 2019, they picked up 3 seats, Barwon, Murray, and they retained Orange. So they've got the appeal for the regional vote, but again, they've got a problem in regards to there's still a party that was formed in Sydney. The upper structure, it's still very Sydney orientated, and they're a bit confused sometimes whether they're supporting green policies or they're looking after the people in regional New South Wales. So it's a bit of a flux. They actually down to two members in Parliament now, because Helen Dalton, who I interviewed here a couple of weeks ago, she left the party on the basis of they couldn't work out where they were in their water management. I mean, they're supporting the irrigators in northern New South Wales up the Darling, but that was disadvantage to the people down on the Murray. So it's a pretty hard field to play in regional Queensland, because it's so diverse, and you've got so many different interests. So
I think that the Katter Party have got the right regional Queensland. Well, Queensland in general is always going to be very local because we don't have that upper house, and I think that they've got the right recipe to challenge for more seats in North Queensland. And the more seats, if they go from 3 to 5 or 3 to 7, and the cards fall the right way between Labor and the LNP, then they're in the balance of power, and that's what matters. Is being in the balance of power to really get things done in Queensland. I think that it's hard for long periods of time while you've got a Labor majority government to get things done, for anybody else to get things done. But by crikey, once that happens, once we start getting MPs like the Catters and Stephen Andrew from Morani in the balance of power, and hopefully other decent MPs, whether they're in the city or in the regions, then we really start to be able to get people working together and dealing with issues like forestry in a way that's good for everybody, good for the environment, good for the economy, good for the people.
Under normal circumstances, except when you had things like the Newman landslide in 2012, where they just won a massive margin. But generally, if you can get 7 seats under that sort of regional block, Catters, Steve Andrews, and pick up another couple of independents and that. But if you can win 7 seats, you usually hold the balance of power in most parliaments. So that is a goal that everyone should be aiming at in central North Queensland. And with all due respects to the seats in southeast and that, I don't think we're going to see any regional type parties go to win in there. And the other problem is the other seats in regional in the Southern Division is they're too closely tied to Brisbane in regards to everyday aspects of life. Central North Queensland, we're just far enough away to be a little bit different.
It's a matter of people putting in the effort in southeast Queensland to and it might involve people who are independents, for example, running over several terms and building a profile, but getting the message out. Because I agree, like if regional North Queensland and regional Queensland can get the balance of power, then things will change. But it's going to be a heck of a lot easier if you've got when you've got 50 or more seats in southeast Queensland. If you've got people who are friendly down there as well and understand those issues, it's going to be a heck of a lot easier for us to work together. And that's what we should be doing. Until you guys get your new state, which I'm fully supportive of. If that's what the people of North Queensland want, then that's fine. But until then, it'd be good to be working together.
Yeah, you've got to work. But like I say, I think the key thing is as manageable size seats, there's 6. There's 3 around Townsville and 3 around Cairns that are not like your Cook and your Gregory and those sort of, and Traeger and that. They're just manageable seats where you can mount a fairly good campaign without having to travel those vast distances, and you've got a concentrated population that if you've got the support there from members of the party or friends or whatever, you can mount a decent campaign in those 6 seats. So I think they're the key to moving forward before you can catch one of those other bigger seats.
People do need to get out there. You spoke about Collide before, and I drove up to Biloela to pick up election materials and then down to Miles to help out the candidate there at the last election. So but people need to get out and help those candidates out, because they've got massive seats, and the major parties have a lot more support.
Well, they have established support.
Yes,
that's the big difference.
Support,
generations and generations have followed them in their thing. So that I think that's
people need to get active.
Yeah. So hopefully that's on there. But the other thing that's coming up before the 2024 election is a redistribution, and I looked at some figures between the 2016 federal election and the 2022 federal election. In Queensland, we've had an increase of about 440,000 voters, eligible voters, and that's a rate of about 71,000 a year. Well, we've still got another 2 years to go, so that's another 140,000. So by the time the redistribution's due, they'll have to be looking at integrating another 500 and nearly 50,000 voters. That's got to take some manipulation on boundaries and that. So it's going to be very interesting to see if regional Queensland keeps the same number of seats, or we'll see a couple of disappear and a couple more created in southeast Queensland, which is going to make it more difficult in the future.
I actually looked into this, and I tried to talk to the Electoral Commission, but I don't think I'm wrong. My understanding is that a redistribution can only happen every 7.5 years, and that the last one is less than 7.5 years between the last redistribution in 2017 and the 2024 election.
Yeah, so but what you'll find is the reviews that happened in 2016. What that was enacted in 2017. Yeah. But the review was started in 2016, and I've actually spoken to the Electoral Commission, and yes, it's on, and it's got to happen before the next election. But that's a major redistribution. They can always have adjustments before each election anyway. If some of the electorates get completely out of whack of tolerance. But normally the big one is every 8 years or 7.5 years, especially now with the four-year terms. It will be every second term that will be a full review, but it's definitely on. And like I say, there's the growth in eligible voters since the last full redistribution is huge. You're talking over 500,000 extra voters to be, squeezed into the different seats and that.
Yeah,
so it's something interesting that we've got to look at. Yeah. Just before we wind up, if we could just talk about New South Wales again. My understanding is that the access to the national parks and hunting is only a recent sort of occurrence.
No, well, it depends on what you call recent. It was in the mid 2000s, and that's for state forests. There's not access for national parks, or not general access. There's a couple of organisations that do pest management, volunteer pest management, but that's not hunting like I do. It's an outstanding system. It's you book your hunt online, you do training to make sure that you're safe. There's a limited number of hunters allowed in a forest at any one time, and you're only allowed to hunt at night, or no, hunt it during the daytime, not allowed to hunt at night, not allowed to hunt for vehicles. It's safe. There has never even been a near miss in the New South Wales forests, and it generates the last state forest specific cost benefit analysis said that it generated, or economic impact analysis said that it generated $119 million for the New South Wales economy, and I think that was 5 years ago now. It'll be a lot more now, we could transplant the IT systems into Queensland and manage our forests that way now. It's really fantastic, and it's just a shame that we haven't had a government on either side that have been prepared to do that. And
especially you've got a working model. I mean, if you're going into something new, you can have your doubts in that. But if you've got a proven model, it's like you say, it's just a matter of transplanting it there, and sort of well, why should we lose revenue? It's like the old pokies. New South Wales used to have the pokey, and everyone from Victoria went to New South Wales and spent their money. So now we're sending people from Queensland to New South Wales to hunt and spend their money down there. We need to retain it here. It seems fairly simple. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. And there's towns all around the Barracool State Forest that would benefit, everywhere from, Biloela down to Chinchilla, and everywhere in between that would benefit from people going in and out. And that's the same on all of the public land throughout Queensland. And that's not happening because we're not allowed to hunt there, and because other recreation's very, very limited.
And the thing is, regional towns, especially small regional towns, need as much help as they can to sort of, stop from wilting away. So
it's a big deal.
All those things need to be part of the mix.
Yep, definitely.
Okay, then, if you'd just like to point out any other things before we go, but we'll wrap up here.
I'll just quickly show people what my pages look like, if that's all right. Just to... here's the State Forest Hunting for Queensland page. So get onto the pages, and if you're interested, so that's what that page looks like. Got the maroon heading there, and the pig with the crosshairs on them, and I keep that up to date with various different stories and the like. And we've got the Queensland State Forest User Alliance page as well. And I try to keep that up with various different issues as well. So so I'd appreciate if people get on board, and if they want to contact me with any outstanding issues, I'm happy to give them a run.
We'll put those links on the page, and with this we put this interview up with anyway.
Thank you very much.
Look, I'd really like to thank you for your time tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, guys.
It's fantastic. If you could just stay online for a sec, I'll just wrap up and have a quick conversation before we close down.
No worries. Thank you.
If you've enjoyed tonight's show, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Next week, I hope to have Felix Ellis on. He's the MP in Tasmania, who's had a brilliant speech the other week in regards to the support of the timber industry in Tasmania. So join us again next week. Thank you.